Vietnam was the first televised war. Video and photography put the war in the living room of every American who owned a television set. But while the media had jurisdiction over what was aired, it wasn't their fault that we were losing a war. It was simply their fault that it was a losing war that became the first we could access from the comforts of our homes. Although it certainly may have seemed it during Vietnam, the media was not and is not all bad. First, we have to ask ourselves how it is we find out what's going on in the world on a day-to-day basis. And then we have to note that if not for the media, America would have been largely in the dark on what was our first non-victorious war, even more so than what the government kept from us. And because of this promoted awareness, activism ensued. In fact, New York Times journalist David Halberstam witnessed a Buddhist monk commit a self-immolation while reporting from the field in Saigon. He said, "I was too shocked to cry, too confused to take notes or ask questions, too bewildered to even think." This serves as a good reminder that journalists are humans too, even when they're not telling us exactly what we want to hear. But it's an ugly world out there, and we need to respect that journalists are doing their job by bringing us facts even when it's uncomfortable. So when I started reading Watchmen, I couldn't help but ask myself if the novel was portraying the media in a positive or negative light. Granted, the novel does change the outcome of the war, so one might assume the media was cast as doing a job well done. But when we look closely at all the media presence, which manifests particularly in newspapers, most of the news is bad news. But does bad news constitute a negative media presence? I would argue not. Because most of the time, as in real-life Vietnam, the newspapers most prominently boast the most important news. The news that isn't always good, and in fact, more often than not, isn't. The media frame the goings-on of the world into concise boxes for us. It brings you what you need to know based on fact, timeliness, prominence, and proximity. It frames for us the happenings in the world that, although they appear on our television screens, are not exactly happening right outside our doors. What people sometimes fail to realize, which I think a critical glance at the media presence in Watchmen shows, is that sometimes the only news to report is the stuff we don't want to hear. But it's still essential that we read it. All of the instances of destruction displayed on our front pages, and the suicide bombers and guerrilla warfare happening thousands of miles from here, are what call us to action, much like what assembles the Watchmen. And maybe they were able to achieve the outcome we only wish could have occurred in real life. But it's the same awareness and informedness around us that inspires us to push for a better tomorrow.